Now I'm so excited. We have an incredible speaker, awesome moderator to kick us off. So today we are going to start with Shameek Bose, who frequently travels to far corners of the planet, and he brings an unprecedented ability to spot trends and create disruptive models that allow his clients to flourish and compete locally while maintaining a global mindset. Shameek, is a global leadership fellow for the World Economic Forum and a national board member for GLAAD, and is a strong believer in empathetic leadership, especially during these unpredictable times. And he'll be sitting down with PowerToFly's Kristen Hughes to dive deeper into this important topic. So please help me welcome Shameek Bose and Kristen Hughes.
Thank you so much, Hunter. Really appreciate it. Also, first and foremost, want to thank everyone in the audience who came to join us for this incredible Pride at Work Summit. I could not be more proud to work with this company and to be speaking with the wonderful Shameek Bose. Shameek, hi, good to see you again.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So just to kind of let everybody know how we're going to work this. So Shameek and I have talked before. So we know each other a little bit, and we met before this talk to sort of see how we were going to run this. And we thought that because we're both members of this community and because we're both leaders, that it would be really helpful for us to tell you a little bit about ourselves and why this is such an important talk to both of us. So with that being said, Shameek, I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So I would really like to begin my story from when I was born. I'm a child of Calcutta, India. And my mother, when I was just 4 years old, made a really brave decision to immigrate to the US, which gave me a whole new life. Fast forward a couple of decades, I end up coming out to my family when at the age of 25. I will say it was a difficult adjustment for my parents. But the more interesting part of this is that when I do go back to India, and I do go back pretty frequently to visit my extended family, in my 20s, they would ask me, when are you getting married to a woman, right? But I would say about 9 years ago, when I turned 30, they stopped asking me that, which I thought was really kind. They essentially stopped asking me to code switch to be around them. Now, transitioning to the workplace, I will say that I've been out in the workplace for most of my life, but I can't say I always felt included, right? I worked at very traditional environments to very radical ones. And oftentimes I found myself using code switching as a survival mechanism, because code switching allowed me to disappear into the background without having to challenge the status quo, which something I was afraid to do in my 20s. And so that's really an element of today's talk today and what I would like to address with your audience.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Shameek. Always appreciate hearing your story. So a little bit about me. I am a lesbian woman. I grew up in a very small community, a small island off the coast of southeastern North Carolina. I grew up in a very Southern Baptist home, and just really a very small, old value sort of community. It took a really long time for my family to be anything resembling kind to me, about who I am. I came out as soon as I graduated from high school. I had known forever, but as soon as I left the house, I was done. I came out, and it was I was ostracized from my church family, and I really just used college as that was my new home. That was where I knew that my chosen family was going to be what was going to get me through my life, and that there are a lot of things that are thicker than blood. And then, fast forward through that, I worked in a lot of male dominated industries after college. I was in the military, and that was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. I am very grateful that I was actively in the military when President Obama did repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and that was a very proud moment for me. But that's a really good example, to your point, Shameek, of the code switching. In the military, I had to be very cognizant of the leadership that I was around, the group of people that I was working with on a daily basis, because before it was repealed, that was something that, court-martial justice could have been, served. So I did it a lot. And then even after that, same as you. And a lot of those traditional workplaces, we had to code switch, because the last thing we wanted, especially if you work at an at-will state where they can fire you for anything, you're terrified. So you do hide it. So that's everything from me.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course, Shameek. As you know, I love talking and sharing with you. It is always a pleasure. So that being said, Shameek, now that the audience knows a little bit about us and kind of our background, and seeing as how we're both leaders in our respective companies, what would you say are some of the key challenges that we're facing today in the workplace for our community?
Yeah, I have a really simple question for your audience, which is, why do LGBT people still need to come out, right? Straight people don't have to come out of the closet. And it's a really simple answer. We experienced homophobia growing up, which actually led us to a very powerful journey of self-discovery and self-acceptance. But it's still important to center those struggles in conversation today, even after 50 years from Stonewall, because the fact of the matter is, a lot of discrimination today is kind of hard to detect, right? Like, most people are not facing, in my network, harassment in corporate cultures, right? Yet, when it comes to leadership positions, when it comes to board positions, we're still not being afforded those opportunities. And my question is, why is that?
It's a great question. And, it really it really makes me wonder, like, even if our community is not facing this outright harassment or discrimination in corporate cultures, which is not to say it's not happening at all, but from what we're both hearing from our networks, it's not that prominent. It seems like keeping us out of those sort of positions is its own form of discrimination. It's just a little sneakier.
Yeah.
So I guess it just depends on which way you want to take that. To me, that's almost worse, because then you don't really know who the enemy is, So moving right along here, how do you define pride as an individual when you're working within a company?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Very simply, I think pride is self-love, which in turn makes people really comfortable working with me, right? That's a benefit of going through the self-discovery and acceptance process. Because in today's workforce, especially where digital, remote, authenticity is what really builds trust. And that's when we say, bring your full self to work. It's because there's value in that, in connection. But the larger question we need to ask ourselves as a society now is, how do we build trust-based relationships that impact the way I do business? Of course, I as an individual have a huge role to play in that, but so do companies. So when it comes to companies, creating equitable environments is really core, right? I mean, we got to get that right. I'm a very data-driven person. So all these discussions we're having now are quite meaningless unless we can measure progress in companies. So we need to measure across all levels and departments to assess, do we as a company have a blind spot in terms of placing diverse talent within job functions? For example, are the LGBT people only concentrated in one department, like in HR? Are all the women just in the marketing place? And is our client-facing sales force still all white men, right? Once we start measuring in this way, we can actually achieve a diverse workforce. But then we need to take another step further, which is we need to create a culture of inclusion. a really quick way that I will say we can measure is that, count the number of times each person speaks in a meeting, like literally do that in a meeting. And I think you'll be astonished by the results, because the people that get to ask the most questions, the people that speak up the most, is an indication of belonging in the organization. And if you see that's equitable, then you have a sense of how equitable your organization is. And finally, policy also has to be updated. So do LGBT partners get the same spousal benefits as their heterosexual counterparts? Pride is a really great moment on an annual basis to measure how we're doing against all of these metrics. Because all the rainbow flags and the logos are just lip service if we, as corporate leaders, are not doing the real work within organizations. And I'll give you one anecdote, which is a research study that just was published calling out corporations that are wrapping themselves in a pride logo, chasing consumer dollars, yet giving to actual anti-LGBT politicians throughout the rest of the year, which I've just found to be astonishing, but not also believable.
Absolutely. And, Shameek, I know that you and I have just gone back and forth talking about this exact same thing, about all of these companies that just wrap themselves in rainbow when June comes along. It's the same companies that blacked out all of their social media after the death of George Floyd to support Black Lives Matter. And it really tells you exactly what you were talking about. Like, are you just doing this for consumer dollars? Or do you actually have policies in place in your workplace to make them inclusive, to make them equitable? Because the reality of it is that the majority of those places do still have a single dominant culture, especially in client-facing positions. And it's kind of unfortunate. And I hope that we can move the needle. To your point, and something that you and I have also talked about, we have to walk this walk 365 days a year. We have Pride in June, but you and I are still going to be gay the other 11 months out of the year. African American people are going to still be African American the other 11 months out of the year, just like any other marginalized demographic. I think it's wonderful that we have a space and a time to celebrate our history, but we have to start making policies that give us that inclusion and equity every day of the year, because we don't just magically, turn into different people when our designated month is over. So really interesting thing about all of this, because we're both leaders. I know that we both have very broad networks in our personal and our professional lives. What are you hearing specifically from your network about everything that's going on surrounding this issue right now?
Yeah, first, I just would like to commend you, Kristen, because you yourself is a really great leader. But I think what makes you really unique is your intersectionality of your various identities that actually gives you this ability to hold complexity, right? So intersectionality is our gift, but in order to get here, we also have to process the trauma of homophobia. And my point is that homophobia is still lingering in our society, still lingering in the workplace, but probably in more subtle ways through microaggressions. And so when I poll my network about this, many report that they often feel that they still have to code switch in corporate environments. So what is code switching really a sign of? It's shifting towards a dominant culture in an effort to just fit in. And what are some of the characteristics of that dominant culture? It's about who gets favored, which voices get centered repeatedly. And it's also about, and it's always pulling towards, as you said, the group with the most entrenched power. So as LGBT people, we can ask ourselves, when do I want to push back against that? And there is a risk reward trade-off in that decision that I want to be mindful around. But if we can be more conscious about when to take those risks, we can actually increase the odds of doing something about things that make us uncomfortable in the moment. So my invitation for the LGBT members of your audience today is to try to intervene when you do feel the desire to code switch. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this pressure? And is there an intervention that I could do on the environment that's putting this pressure on me to show up inauthentically, to fit in, and requiring me to fit in?
That makes a whole lot of sense. And, I feel like that is a really powerful and broad overview for sure. So, that being said, what exactly do you think that companies and leadership should be paying attention to within their workforces?
Yeah, interesting fact. The Economist reports that companies are going to be pivoted by turnover out of the pandemic. And, one thing, we're having a really American conversation here, because in America, we identify with our work a lot more than other parts of the world do. And I would say that even through the pandemic, it's become a lot more central to our lives, especially if you're LGBT. Because as an LGBT employee, you're already probably working for a company, if you're lucky, that aligns with your values, for its ability to embrace you. So my proposition to the rest of corporate America is, why don't we design for employees that are most value aligned with our company's mission? So let's redesign these environments so all employees derive purpose and meaning from participating in the workplace, because it's a template that can be distributed across entire industries. And the great thing about it is that LGBT people are uniquely positioned to lead us in through this transition. Because, as your coming out story says, we've already built community. We know how to redesign our lives because we were ostracized from our homes, right? We know how to create a roadmap, what questions to ask, how to uplift marginalized voices, and in the process, create community in the workplace. But I think there is still a roadblock to achieving community in the workplace, which is corporations coming out of the pandemic need to embrace that the role of the corporation is to be a bridge builder, is to creating community. But how do we do that? We're not asking you to be best friends with your coworkers, to have shared values. What we're asking you is to be more mindful about what hindrances we have in the workplace that create unnecessary competition, primarily driven by kind of antiquated concepts of rank in the workplace, right? And the first thing, I want to say about this is, we can afford to pay a living wage, right? Especially in this low tax corporate environments that we enjoy. So if people aren't competing for survival and rank, think about how much more supportive we can be towards one another. And that's actually to the benefit of the corporation. The second is that we need to move away from traditional forms of management, moving away from checking if people are doing work to actually empowering them to do their best work. This means that we simply no longer need any more micromanagers, right? If your workers are already self-motivated because they feel that they're contributing to the mission of the organization, then just focus on keeping that alignment first and foremost. That doesn't mean we don't give constructive feedback. That doesn't mean that we even sometimes let go of people or need to upskill them. But what this calls for is a much more distributed form of management than the top-down approach that we're used to.
Absolutely, Shameek. You said so many good things. Right then, there's a couple that I want to touch on. One being the need to get rid of micromanagement. I think that's a really important thing for our audience to really sit and think about for a minute, and think about what that really means, and think about ways that you can better manage people. And I know this is something else you and I talked about. It's people are so much more productive for you and for the company when you empower them, when you support them, when you collaborate with them, when you let them know that if they have a better idea than you do on how to handle that, just show it to me. And if your idea wins, let's go with that. It's so much better as a leader to work side by side with the people on your team instead of working against them, instead of making them feel like there's a little bird on their shoulder with a camera in his beak, And I really wanted to pinpoint on that because I feel like that is something that the workforce in general still really struggles with. And I know that it's more prominent among um, marginalized demographics because, we are more often watched, and that's just a fact. So moving right along, Shameek, before I know we're going to have a little bit of time for some questions, I wanted to ask you if you had any actionable directives to give the audience in terms of what we can do specifically to redesign the work environment for equity.
Yeah, and this is a conversation I'm having with many leaders today who are all thinking about how do we go back with intention. And some of the best ideas that I'm hearing so far is, why not create the transition of the office space to be jam-packed opportunities for collaboration, right? We can redefine the workplace as a hub for exchanging ideas, for collaboration, because there's no point in silently like watching each other work, right? We're no longer an assembly line. We don't need to monitor the work. We've proven that in the pandemic. But what is missing from our Zoom lives is workplaces that foster creativity. It's about letting go of the face time that used to be associated with the workplace to, you're actually going there to collaborate. Also, what's been revealed during the pandemic is that the relationship fabric that companies have created through proximity, through frequency of seeing coworkers all the time, has really led to a trust-based work environment that makes companies thrive. And so rebuilding that authentic connection, those trust-based relationships should be the focus as we come out of this pandemic, because my bet, that is what is going to be the key to future success.
Could not agree with you more. Could not possibly agree with you more. I really think you hit the nail on the head. So we do have an audience question. This is from Craig. They would like to know, how can team leaders and managers make inclusion a priority in their workplace?
Yeah, I want to go back to something that we talked about earlier, which is the need. We have already seen case study after case study that says diversity is a cornerstone for innovation. And so what's the point of having a pipeline of diverse talent or transitioning the organization to be completely diverse in all parts of the organization, which is still a goal, by the way, but let's say we reach that goal. And then people don't feel the right to speak up. People don't feel confident to challenge biases. People don't are asked for their opinions. So we go through this whole transformation as an institution, and then when we get to the very end, we starve off the creativity. And that's what happens when we don't create inclusive workplaces.
Perfect. Well, Shameek, we do have just a couple minutes left. I'm not seeing many more questions in the chat. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave our audience with right here before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I kind of want to go back to my original point that it's been 50 years since Stonewall. We still feel that in lots of environments, we need to subtly code switch. And we see these barriers to senior management, barriers to capital, barriers to board positions. And so my invitation is, let's try to work together as a community, regardless of gender identity and representation and race, because the goals that we're achieving towards, the goals that we're trying to get to, is actually helping us all, regardless of those identities, right? It's creating thriving organizations that's based on trust in relationships. And so I think it's in it for everyone to make the effort, because everyone gets the benefit. And so it's not about just one segment of the population needs to be uplifted, which we do, but it's not at the expense of another. And I just wanted to leave that thought with your audience.
That's so beautiful. I love that we can all succeed without hurting somebody else. That's such an incredibly powerful statement. I know that we're wrapping up just a couple minutes early, but Shameek, as always, I want to thank you so much for joining PowerToFly and speaking at our Pride at Work Summit. Always, always a pleasure. I hope we get to do it again soon. And thank you so much to our audience for tuning in as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you both so much for that very important and powerful conversation. I really appreciate it.